Hi, and welcome to the 47th episode of the Photoshop Show. Tonight we've got a really special guest. I know they're all really special, but Don Komarechka is really special. He's what's in a friendly way known as the snowflake guy around here. He has just released Sky Crystals, a book with the most incredible images of snowflakes that you've ever seen, and a lot of really, really cool things about snowflakes you don't even know. And so he's going to talk to us a little bit about that, as well as talk to us about something that I'm really curious about and I've never tried, and that's digital infrared photography. Don was shooting some of that on a photo walk he took. Welcome to the episode of the Hold on a second. I'm going to have to find to pause that. I know they're all really
There's two of you.
Found it. There was a YouTube in the background. Anyway, so with us tonight, along with Don, of course, is our regular panel. We have Dave Bell. Hi, Dave.
Hello. Good evening.
Good evening. What you been up to lately?
Oh, well, just finished our quarter here. Been grading exams. Just got done with that, and so I'm enjoying the holidays.
Yeah, that'll be good for the holidays. Empty mark over the holidays?
Last of the reveals for the scavenger hunt. That's been over the last 10 days. That's been a lot of interesting, just amazing photos. And,
it has been. Being
both Ron and Jan were judges for that. And
that's right. Yeah, we were both judges, weren't we, Jan?
Yeah, we were. It was so fun.
Yeah, that was a lot of images to go through, I'll tell you. But you know what I was saying to Dave earlier, I think that with the scavenger hunt, being a judge, I see that a lot of us judged very similarly, and I really feel that the best work was well represented. It was a really great...
Yeah, I noticed that too. Particularly, oh God, what's her name? I'm losing her name. There was another woman judge whose name is...
Krista Ray or Robin Griggs?
Robin. It was, sorry, Robin. Robin Griggs Wood. And I noticed so often she and I agreed. Of course, we didn't confer. We just came out with the same results. And that's pretty unusual given the number of photos in every category.
It is.
So they must have been really good photos.
Yeah. And Erika Thornes, hi. Oh, you're muted. Sorry, I sprung that on you.
Oh, no problem. Hi.
How are you doing?
Good, good. I'm really happy to be here, and I'm so happy to see some more of Don's work and just to dive in. But I'm also feeding 3 hungry children tonight, so if I dive out, I apologize.
Oh, that's fine. I like the casual atmosphere we have. So jump out whenever you need. Just don't forget to mute. And of course, our usual main host, Jan. Hi, how are you doing tonight?
Hello, I'm good, Ron. How are you?
Oh, doing great.
I'm glad. I like to see a smile there.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything that you're working on recently, or anything great this week except for the photography photo hunt, the scavenger hunt?
The scavenger hunt, yes. Well, I got to teach live a couple of times this week, and that was pretty fun. I love doing that because it's kind of like this, where you get some feedback as opposed to just talking into a microphone. So I got to do that, and setting up things for next year, lots of exciting possibilities. Oh, including, I do have something to announce, which is I'm going to be a speaker at the ADIM 2014 conference. ADIM stands for the Art Directors Invitational, and it is Russell Brown's conference that he's been having. This is the 14th one, of course, and it's such an honor to be asked to speak. Russell, of course, is the pinnacle of everything Photoshop, so I'm really looking forward to that. And I think I'm going to talk about Lightroom and try to get some converts among the designer audience to go over to Lightroom, because I think Lightroom is getting even bigger. It's not just going to be photographers.
Oh, that's interesting. I'd like to hear more later about how that might work out with not being a photographer and being able to use Lightroom.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. And I'm going to do the official introduction to Dawn here. Dawn and I are actually pretty close to being neighbors. You're just up in Barrie there, and are you the president and founder of the Barrie Photo Club?
I'm the president, but not the founder.
Okay, president. So I just clarified. So you're the president of the Barrie Photo Club. I had the pleasure of going out there and doing a little workshop presentation on off-camera flash photography this summer. That was really, really great. But Dawn, unfortunately, wasn't able to be there.
Well, I was there at the beginning. I greeted you, and then I had to run off because I was teaching at Georgian College that same evening, and I was sort of double booked. And I've always been somewhat regretting that I missed that presentation. I heard great things from everybody that was in attendance.
Oh, good. Good. Thanks. I like to work also in a live environment. I'm a little unnerved at first, but then I settle in pretty well. So, anyway, I don't want to delay. I'd love to hear more about, first of all, that you used a Kickstarter type program to get this book off the ground.
Right.
And how that went and where you're at now.
So I guess we'll start with snowflakes then.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So earlier this year, in the April time frame thereabouts, I launched an Indiegogo campaign. So very similar to Kickstarter, same idea. And I needed to raise the money to fund my book. And when you're doing the self-publishing thing, like if you were to print a book like the one that I've done through a service like Blurb, it would cost like $100 and something a copy, and that's just the production cost. So you know how profitable Blurb must be on things like that.
Oh, yeah.
And so I figured, well, for what I want to do, I can't do like a print-on-demand thing. I have to actually go and do a full production run, and that's not cheap. I mean, it's cheap per book, but you have to fork out a lot of money in order to make that happen. So I went to the internet at large and said, okay, this is what I want to do. And sight unseen, there was no book done, there was no layouts or anything. People had just been enjoying my images for a few years. And the internet responded in kind. They said, you know, everybody was just totally for it. A lot of people that have received the book actually thought that they were just getting a photo book, and were quite taken aback by the fact that it's just full of science and photographic technique, and there's far more written content in it than a lot of people expected. And I was trying to find a good balance between all that, while still having a section that was a good coffee table book as well. So I set the plan in motion, and I needed to raise $15,000, and I raised through the campaign $25,000 and some, and so I was able to make a bigger and better book, and continue along through the development process, and then had it printed, and had some unfortunate production problems with the printing of the book. And so, long story short, because I could ramble on about this for a long time, but the entire print run of the book needed to be redone, because the heavy print content, or the heavy ink content rather, on the snowflakes, which we'll see some images of in a little bit, but to give just a brief description, they're all on a black background. So there's a lot of ink involved in making that happen. And so the web press, the kind of press technology that has a gigantic, like almost like a spool of paper on the backside, and then that runs through 4 different colors, CMYK, and then immediately after all the ink is laid on, it goes through a dryer, and in like 2 seconds it becomes completely dry, and then out comes the pages on the other side. And in that process of rapidly adding ink and then drying it, caused a lot of the pages to ripple. And letting the book sit didn't really mitigate this problem too much, and I was kind of panicking at that point. I came to an agreement with the printer that they were willing to cover the entire cost that I'd put into the production if I was willing to pay the additional costs to use a different printing technology and a heavier paper to prevent this problem. So you know, this was in November. And so I'm panicking at this point because I've got to get books out by Christmas, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm losing sleep over this problem, and it's quite severe, at least to me. Some people have said it's not really noticeable. Other people, like certain retailers, didn't want to sell it. So it was an issue. And thankfully the books arrived on around December 3rd or so, and I frantically started packaging and shipping out the books to everyone. And I can confidently say now that everybody's book is in the mail. Most people have already received the book, and if you haven't received it, you're getting it this week. And I've got overwhelmingly positive feedback on this book. And it's not a small book. It's a 300-page book, 304 pages, and about 9 inches square. And it's all on snowflakes. If you could think that I could ramble on for 300 pages about snowflakes, I could have made that easily 400. So.
Wow.
It's been a very long process, and for me, I'm the photographer, I'm the layout designer, I'm the writer, I'm the marketer. I'm wearing a lot of different hats in this process. I'm doing all the order fulfillment as well. So I get to see every corner of how this is put together, and not get a lot of sleep in the interim, because I'm trying to do all these different things. And I can say that it's been a success at this point. I can finally say mission accomplished.
Yeah.
So I'm really happy about that. But the whole project, if I can dial it back, came about from photographing snowflakes and how interesting they were, and the techniques that I developed that were, I'm not going to say hadn't been tried, but hadn't been done very successfully in the past.
Yeah, one of the things, I'll just interrupt as you go through, and you're going to talk about it, but one of the things, when I share your work and share some of the work that I do that was inspired by seeing that you've done snowflakes using focus stacking or image stacking freehand, and you do it freehand with snowflakes, and I thought, if you could do it with snowflakes, I can do it with anything. And so I started doing a lot of freehand focus stacking, and a lot of people can't believe that. So I'm really, looking forward to kind of reinforcing that, yes, this is possible.
It certainly is, and just to further your point, Ron, a lot of people might look at my images, and I've had people say, "Oh, wow, that's a nice computer-generated whatever," or and I don't know if I should take that as a compliment. I mean, I guess I do it so perfectly that it looks fake, but no, it's all natural, and so when I'm editing these images, it takes a lot of effort and time to put them together the way that I want. And let's why not show off a few of them now, if that's all right.
That would be perfect.
So let's try to fire up Lightroom here, and just give me 1 second to figure out the proper screen. So you should be seeing an infrared picture there. Let's jump off to a snowflake here first of all. So this is a typical snowflake, or well, it's one of my typical snowflakes. They're not all this beautiful. In fact, most snowflakes are quite ugly. But
right now, I don't know about you guys, but I'm just seeing Don's avatar, and are you guys seeing Lightroom? You're muted there, Dave.
I clicked on his face and then I'm able to see it, so I don't know.
Okay, so I'm not worried. It's just me then. It's being broadcast out. Good.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm seeing it fine.
Okay. So in this case, in this particular snowflake, I have an extreme amount of detail, and I even have a little bit of color. If I were to zoom in on this, you'll see that within this, it's loading off of my Drobo right now, and these are big files, but you'll have some interesting colors show up in some of the little tiny little details of this snowflake, and I just find personally that that's quite enjoyable to explore and to see. Some of them are quite symmetrical. So you've got snowflakes like this one here, if I zoom out on that have a lot of beautiful symmetry across the board. And one of the ones from this year that I've just recently done, and I'm almost ready to call this one a favorite. This is definitely a crowd favorite. And
very cool.
This particular snowflake has it changed its growth patterns halfway through its life, I guess, and went from one style of snowflake to a completely different style of snowflake. And you can see that the detail is pretty incredible. You've got, I upscale these in perfect resize just to give a bit more definition when I go to print. So these ones are print ready. But you've got all sorts of beautiful, fun little bits and pieces of crystals and formations and things in there. And a lot of interesting discoveries too. I want to show you this one here because this particular snowflake was one that I photographed on 2 different angles. And so this is the exact same techniques that I'd normally be using, but my flash is not reflecting directly back into the camera. And so I photographed the entire snowflake, and to some pretty interesting results. There's some beautiful colors that show up in the branches. And the science geek in me gets really excited when I see things like that, and I go and I research it. I figure it all out, that it's the same thing that a prism would generate if you shine white light through it, and it gets a rainbow out the other side.
Yeah.
But
Have
this,
just I got a question about that, because this is something I thought about. Have you tried experimenting to intentionally exaggerate that effect by perhaps using colored gels or different light sources?
well, a lot of people have, but I think that when you're dealing with reflected light, you're going to get a different result than if you use transmitted light, which would be light passing through the snowflake that maintains that color. I don't know if it would have as much of a benefit, and in fact, it would detract from the natural rainbows because the natural rainbows would be affected by colored light.
Yeah.
But that being said, not all snowflakes will have these wonderful features. Some of them are just void of color, but they're still beautiful in other ways. But I wanted to show you this snowflake because if I take this crystal and I just shift my angle of photographing it by maybe 3 or 4 degrees very slightly, the ring flash that's on the end of my camera will also move with the whole camera body, and the angle of light reflecting off the snowflake will shift, and then I get this. So this is the same snowflake photographed at a different angle.
Wow.
And so the features that you see in here are all the same, but appear quite a bit different. And so the photographer has a lot of control over how the subject appears in front of the camera. And it takes a bit of finesse to figure out what that proper angle is, but the end result can be exactly what you want it to be. You can choose to have it reflective, you can choose to have it showing just the edge detail, and there's a lot of fun to be had. Here's an example of one that has no color, but it has some beautiful patterns and designs that I think are quite stunning on their own without having the color in there. This snowflake would not be nearly as beautiful, at least in my opinion, if it had just the edges as the brightest point, and so the branches would be pretty much transparent. And in that case, I think that it would lose the impact on it. So you've got the creative choice. Some snowflakes work better in one way or another.
Wow, that's awesome. This last one here actually reminds me of when I watched frost go across my car window. You know, when you put the washer fluid on, and it just sends out like that. Yeah.
Just a quickly question is, so you said that you did a lot of writing. I might have missed it. What was your writing that you filled up? What were you writing about? Were you writing about your technique? Were you writing about snowflakes in general?
So the book is sort of divided in 3. The first third of it is all science, so it describes exactly how snowflakes form, why some form with color and some without, and why some form as to very small hexagons, why some have very big centers and some don't really have a noticeable one, and all the science involved in how they branch and all that kind of stuff. So if you're a science geek, there's like 100 pages to geek out on and figure out exactly why something so small can be so unique and so beautiful. The next third is all photographic techniques, so about 100 pages or so on how I shoot and how I edit, going into exhaustive details in both the photography and the 4-hour editing process that each image goes through in Lightroom and in Photoshop. And then the final third of it is basically an image gallery, so that's the coffee table book part of it, and so you can just flip through and enjoy the pretty pictures if you're not a scientist or a photo nerd. So there's some interesting.
Fantastic! It's gonna. I know I wrote you privately, and I was just like, is it gonna be on Amazon? You know, and it's like, I think that it is. It's something that I want to have, so I'm going to be ordering it.
Oh, well, thank you, Erika. And to that, I just want to make another point too. That worrying about the logistics of getting this out to market too has been a big pain. And Amazon, I don't know if I can get it to Amazon, at least not Amazon in the U.S. Amazon takes a big percentage of the sticker price. They take 55%. Yeah. And so then if I subtract my manufacturing costs, there's not a lot of profit left, and it costs a lot to ship it. Yeah. So I did the math, and I figured that if I was to send Amazon 50 books, I would have to pay over $500 for shipping. And that's not including the duty that I would also have to pay, and I would make $400 and something profit. So I would lose money on sending them to Amazon. So it doesn't make any sense, unfortunately, for me to have them there. So Erika, I'm sorry to say, but you might have to pay for shipping.
Yes, I understand. I've been spoiled.
So Don, how's that going to work? I imagine a lot of the books you sent out at first were to the Indiegogo people that donated money. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the first print run I had sent out, I just did some in Canada because I knew that there might be issues with this, and I wasn't 100% happy, but I had little recourse at that time. So I sent out about 40 or 50 books in my book launch party, so about 100 books had gone out. So I had to reship books to all of those people when the new ones came out. And so that the cost of shipping is not cheap. I mean, for me, and not factoring it into the cost of money that I had gathered, that was about an extra $10,000 expense. And the extra reprint of the book cost an extra $10,000 expense. So the break-even point hasn't arrived yet, but I still have lots of extra copies. So if you're interested in this kind of stuff, then please take a look at it. And for those curious right now, we'll mention it again later, but you can get that at skycrystals.ca. But I want to show off.
Before you do, I was going to mention. I don't know if you were with us when I was explaining that my son did a project on Kickstarter. He developed a 3D printer.
Oh, cool.
Went crazy on Kickstarter. I mean, he got so much money, way more than anyone had expected. And this was about 6 months ago. Now he has an ongoing business. But the point I wanted to make was he did the same thing. He had not factored in how much it was going to cost to ship those out, and it was a lot. So anybody that's going to do that, remember that you have to think about shipping. Go find out, by weight and by destination. That was a problem for him. He had to ship some to foreign destinations, as do you, I imagine.
Oh yeah, and I lost money on that. So like for all the books that are being enjoyed by people overseas, thank you so much for your contribution, but I've lost money because you might have paid $35, plus a little bit for shipping, but it cost me $50 to ship it. So it varies between 40 and 60 depending on where it was overseas. But I don't mind that. That's my responsibility, and I'm happy to have the book enjoyed in over 20 countries around the world right now, which is a lot of fun.
That's fantastic.
I just want to show off at least a few other snowflakes, and then kind of quickly show sort of the editing process and what I start with versus what I get. And I'm not going to go through the whole process this time. If you're curious about that, we did that in another episode, and you can go into all the details.
Yeah, but just like a cursory walkthrough, just so that there's an
understanding. Oh yeah. Absolutely. So I'll bring back up Lightroom here and show you another quick image. This is one that I posted recently as well that shows you the three-dimensional qualities of a snowflake, and you can see the center of this crystal is on a separate level, and you have ridges coming in on the bottom level that are standing out from the space in between them. So snowflakes can be very three-dimensional shapes, and it's a lot of fun. That would have been lost if I hadn't been photographing this particular crystal on an angle. And it's that angular photography that gives me a lot of depth and a lot of life to some of these images. Mm-hmm. And playing around with the reflected light allows me to play with another kind of color that in some cases can be quite inspiring. This snowflake has a big circular rainbow in the center of it. And it took me a while to figure out what exactly was causing this, because I knew it wasn't the same thing that caused the rainbows and the branches. And the answer is bubbles. Bubbles in the ice, what they do, and here's another even better example. Bubbles in the ice will create a very thin layer of ice on the top and on the bottom. And that thin layer of ice will qualify for a phenomenon called thin film interference. And that's the same thing that puts a rainbow in an oil slick you might see on the pavement, or a soap bubble. And I won't go into all the science and the specifics about that. It's in the book if you care. But it took me a long time to finally realize what exactly was causing these very interesting color patterns inside of a snowflake. And for me, that's as exciting as photographing it, because now I'm learning something new about science. And because people hadn't photographed snowflakes in this way, this extensively, very few people had documented this to the degree that I had. So I kind of felt like I was on the cutting edge of something, and I thought that was kind of fun. So with that said, what I'll do here is I'll show you in Lightroom. We've got some interesting infrared pictures and things that we'll get to in a little bit, but I'll show you how the images start off. And this is sort of my secret stash that you're seeing right now. This is all of these snowflakes that I have photographed so far this winter that I have yet to edit. And there's 83 of them. So it's been a good winter so far, and if I stop now, I probably wouldn't need to take any more pictures, but I certainly will. And so each image coming out of the camera starts like something like this. And so this is a single frame, and I've done a few light adjustments to this particular crystal. But if you look in here, you'll find that it's beautiful and crisp, but very little in focus. keep in mind this snowflake is about 1 millimeter to 2 millimeters in diameter. I haven't quite measured this one, but it's about there. And if I only have this tiny little piece of a snowflake in focus, then my depth of field is razor thin. We're talking fractions of millimeters at this point. And so the trick is, when I'm editing a snowflake like this, I need to get every single sliver of focus across the entire crystal in order to make things, look perfectly sharp from edge to edge. And you can see the black mitten in the background. All the fibers from the mitten kind of come in, and they're easy to edit out. And there's some techniques for that as well. But let's just take a look here and see. Every snowflake that I photograph, if you can see my film strip along the bottom, if I put it up to a grid view, you'll see that all of these images are all images of the exact same snowflake, starting up here and then going all the way down. Actually, I'm just going to try and count. I'll just select the first one and find out wherever my last one is. I don't know how many pictures of this snowflake I took. I took 264 images of this particular snowflake. Because I might, if I look in on one of these particular crystals, this is almost the same one that I had before, almost in the same place, and this one is, of course, in a different place. But all of these images are entirely handheld. And if they're handheld, I have no way to know if I've gotten all of them in focus. So I drastically overshoot. I might use between 30 and 50 on average, but I photograph, in this case, well over 200, because if I miss a piece, I'm screwed. There's no way to get it back, and there's no way to go reshoot that snowflake. So I take it upon myself to just go crazy and shoot as much as I possibly can.
But you said if you change the angle at least 2%, that you're getting a totally different snowflake. So how are you able to hand-hold your camera shooting 200 frames and not alter by 2% in the angle?
That is a very, very good question, Erika. And so when my camera is this big, it's not exactly easy to hold that still over top of that black mitten. But the trick is, when I am holding the camera, I grab the end of the ring flash with my index finger and my thumb, and I rest the pad of my hand on the mitten or the table. Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of using my hand as a tripod, but I think that still qualifies as handheld. Yeah. So then I can use that as an anchor point, and because my hand isn't going to move at that point, I'll keep the snowflake in roughly the same frame. And I offer a bit of contention. I sort of pull with my left hand, and I pull with my right hand, so there's a bit of back and forth go-between, and by doing that, I can easily move the camera in a linear fashion. Keep in mind, I only have to move it back and forth by about 2 millimeters. So keeping that in mind, I don't really have to struggle to keep it within the same alignment. The issue, though, is if I have any amount of wind and the snowflake could kind of just jitter a little bit, if that happens, then there's no chance, because if the snowflake is changing its angle, then it's as if the camera's changing its angle, and my lighting is always going to be different. It's not going to line up properly.
Have you just thought about setting up around your mitten? Have you thought about setting up like a wind block or like I use for my children a lot of times like those tri-fold foam core type things.
It just gets in the way. I have tried, but oftentimes on the windy days is usually not the best for snowflakes.
Okay, well, that makes sense.
If you have sort of a very low wind, and low-lying clouds are good too, and temperatures around -10 to -15, you'll have the best snowflakes to photograph, at least the biggest snowflakes anyhow. And
what do you recommend for us shooters in San Diego?
Okay, so now there is something interesting. You can preserve a snowflake, and so it's actually pretty easy to do. All you need is a piece of glass. Mm-hmm. I use microscope slides, but if you've got some old frames kicking around, you can pop the glass out of that and use it, and some super glue. So what you do is you just leave both of those things outside in a sheltered area. You don't want anything to be on the glass, so you can build a little cardboard box or the stuff that you were talking about to just protect snow from falling on top. And super glue doesn't freeze until about -20. So it'll stay liquid even though it's colder than the freezing point of water, which is important because what you need to do is just get a snowflake on the piece of glass and then put a drop of super glue on top, and then wait. Usually a couple of days with super glue. I use a special scientific resin that takes a couple of hours, but it's not as readily available. And so then when it's dried and hard, you can take it inside and admire it. You can ship it to San Diego, and it will stay perfect.
There you go. Now you know. I have a question from the chat. Charles asked, Don, are you shooting those in burst mode? And he also says, OMG, it's a Canon.
Yes, for the burst mode. All of those images are photographed in. I'm shooting with the 1DX, which has a fairly fast rate of fire. And if you noticed, right out of camera, a lot of my images are slightly underexposed. And that's to allow my flash not to die. Because if I'm firing 300 photographs in the span of about a minute or two, my flash batteries are crying at the end. So I intentionally underexpose based on the flash, and I want to keep a lower ISO, and I just pump it up a little bit in post-processing, and it doesn't harm it too much, and it allows my flash to keep pace. I use an extra battery pack. Canon makes this little guy here. It takes another 8 batteries in addition to the 4 that's in the camera, or in the flash rather. So I have 12 batteries firing away on the flash, and that seems to help quite a bit as well. And OMG, it's a Canon. It is, and you know, Canon is the only company that makes the lens that I use for this. Most macro lenses will get up to a maximum of 1:1 life size, which is great for photographing flowers and insects and even water droplets to a certain degree. But if you want to get closer, and snowflakes are closer, then you need to increase that magnification factor by quite a bit. If you double that, you're now into the realm of the bigger snowflakes from edge of the frame to edge of the frame. But this lens will get 5:1 life size, so 5 times closer. And I typically use extension tubes on that, which gets me about 6:1 if I do the math. So no other company makes this particular lens, but if you're a Nikon shooter or Pentax or Sony or anybody else, you can use extension tubes, and they sit between the camera body and the lens, and they allow you to focus closer by shifting the optics around, by pushing them further out. And so they're a great solution, and usually on a macro lens, a set of extension tubes from a company like Kenko, they'll just about double your magnification. The other trick is just to take any lens and flip it around backwards. The optics of usually simple lenses work better, like prime lenses. But if you flip that around, a 50mm lens put on reverse is about 1:1 life size. And I've got a 24mm prime lens that if I just flip it around and put that in front of the camera, I get about 2:1 life size without doing anything fancy. And you could spend, you could buy them on eBay for about $5 to $10, a little reversal adapter that keeps them connected that way properly.
I built one, and I ended up not being patient, and so my glue was still a little soft, and my 50mm fell onto the tile floor. So I recommend if you do that, wait for your glue to dry.
Yeah, yeah, or just buy one. I've made some homemade stuff as well, Erika, and yeah, I agree with that sentiment completely. Wait for the glue to dry. But you know, when you're doing that kind of stuff, it becomes very difficult because you realize quickly that you can't focus anymore. In fact, the lens that Canon makes has no focusing ring whatsoever or any zoom ring. It has a magnification ring that allows you to change how magnified you are, but there's no way to focus by adjusting settings on the camera. You have to physically move the entire camera body forward or backward by the distance you want to shift the focus. And all extreme macro photography is done this way. And when I teach macro photography courses, I always say, you know, if you want to get the most extreme magnification, just set the camera at its closest focusing distance and then just focus by moving. And you'll have far better results that way than any autofocus could ever achieve.
Yeah, I turn my full autofocus right off on any macro that I do. It just gets in the way.
Yeah. Well, especially if you're trying to get to the extremes, and most people are. You know, when you're trying to do macro stuff, the goal is to get close, right? And if that's your goal, you'll want to get as close as you can. But if you're like just a tiny hair too close, your focus won't lock, and it'll just hunt back and forth constantly, and that's no good to anybody. But if you're focusing by moving the camera forward and backward, you know you're just a tiny smidge too close, and you can just pull back. And it's a much easier solution all around.
And what do you do with the aperture on the tubes, do you have control of the aperture, or do you have, I guess, I mean, there are both kinds of extension tubes, I suppose.
Yeah, so the extension tubes that I'd recommend buying allow you to have control over the aperture, Dave. You could buy really cheap ones on eBay, again, for probably $10 or so, that are just basically metal hollow tubes that have the proper cutouts to connect the lens and camera body together, but there's no electrical connection when you're doing that. And so the ones that I use are from a company called Kenko. And they have the electrical contacts that run through that let me control the aperture. And that's another important thing to consider. When I'm shooting these images, I'm shooting at a very wide aperture, which might be counterintuitive. I'm setting the camera to usually around f3.5 or f4, depending on my magnification.
That is counterintuitive. I've been taught over and over again to shoot at like f11 when you're doing macro. Yes,
the physics of light work against you in this particular situation. If you were to photograph at extreme magnifications, your aperture that you're telling your camera is not the real aperture that's being presented through all the physics of the optics. There's a formula to calculate exactly how it goes, but without getting into those details, if I'm shooting at f4, it might be very close to around f27.
Okay.
And so if I'm shooting at f27, I start to encounter what's called diffraction limiting.
Right.
And that makes the entire image soft, even though it's entirely in focus, because the light is bending around the aperture and hitting neighboring pixels, and going, the further off it goes, the blurrier the results will be.
I'm assuming this is in your book.
It's all in the book, yeah. But you know, if I was exactly, if I were shooting at f16, that I dial in on the camera, and 5:1 magnification, that math works out to f96.
Wow.
And so when I first got this lens, not only do you need the light of 1,000 suns to light your subject at that point, but I thought that I had a defective lens. I thought I just got a bad copy, because every image, you know, I was looking through the viewfinder and it looked great because, you know, the viewfinder has the aperture wide open. And then when I got the images were blurry, and for the life of me, I couldn't figure it out. And it was another one of those wonderful learning experiences where I just dug into the underbelly of the internet and just found all sorts of obscure physics articles that tried to explain it, and I put it all together and made sense of it myself. And so when I'm shooting this macro stuff, I set the camera to f4, but I'm actually shooting, you know, at f27, and diffraction limiting is still affecting my shots then, and I do have to sharpen them up quite a bit in Lightroom. I usually crank it up to around 70 or so.
Don, before we can talk about snowflakes all night. That's fine. But I would, first of all, I got to get the book, because that's going to really tune it up. I'm going to be a pro before you know it. But now I got to go buy a Canon. I don't know if I can do that.
Well, you know, you can mount this lens on a Nikon camera body.
Yeah, I know. I'm just teasing. But what I want to talk about, and this is primarily my own curiosity. One of the other reasons why I'm really happy to have you on the show tonight is, while we were on the photo walk down on the Toronto Island, you shot the image that we used for the banner for our event, which was an image of a lighthouse. And no, it's not shot in the winter. This is shot in the middle of the summer or the late spring, and it's done with infrared technology. And I thought maybe we could transition over to that.
Let's absolutely do that, Ron. So let's bring that up right now. And so this is that image that's used in your opening teaser for this show.
Yeah.
That everybody's been waiting for the main act for us to get to. But this particular image is done with a few interesting things. A modified camera that can photograph in infrared with a fisheye lens on it, and on a timer so that I'm standing in the shot. Sort of, I don't really do many selfies, so that's about as close as I get. And for those that don't know, the infrared spectrum is just below what we can see with our own eyes. And so the colors that you see in here don't actually exist. Now, it comes out of the camera looking something similar to this shot here. And this is how I would begin my editing workflow within Lightroom. And at this point, I have the conundrum to think, okay, well, how do I get this to be what you just saw? And because the colors in here are the camera remaps them to reds, because that's the closest colors in the visual spectrum that we see. But the colors don't actually exist, so you can play around. And I like to make them more familiar when I'm doing colored infrared. I like to make the sky turn blue, and I like to play around with the saturations and things. And I think that it's a much more interesting effect, somewhat ghostly even. But the problem is, what would you say the first thing to do in this image would be, Ron?
Yeah, I wouldn't know where to begin. There seems to be, it's hard from my standpoint, but
Just as an image, not necessarily infrared, but when you've got strange colors like this, what's usually the setting that's incorrect?
You want to do your white balance.
well, you white balance, but there, how do you
Exactly.
do a white balance with infrared? That's
Well,
weird.
you just dial it all the way down until it gets nice. But the problem is, if we bring up, I'll switch myself over to the develop module here. If I bring up my white balance, you'll see that the color temperature is at 2000. It doesn't go any lower than that.
Right.
And in fact, if you put it up to something more reasonable that you might find with flash photography or something around, maybe 6000 or something, the image just becomes ghastly red, and you can kind of see that that it's quite distracting at that point. Jan, you have a yes, I see you.
Student. So what I would try next, I'm totally guessing, is to go to the tone curve panel and mess around with the individual color curves.
You could do that. However, there is a bit of a trick that I've learned. It's a fun little preset that it involves some beta software from Adobe. I say beta. It's been in beta for like 3-4 years, and nobody's touched it since. It's called the DNG Profile Creator. And without actually bringing it up right now, you can take a DNG file of any raw file that you just make one using either Lightroom or Photoshop or the Adobe DNG converter. And in there, you can adjust specifically a bunch of different parameters that are normally, if we go all the way down here to the very bottom in camera calibration, you can adjust the presets and basic standards for these. But there's also another option in there that it has that is not normally available in Lightroom, and that is white balance. Base point is sort of where it starts at. And so in here, once I've created that, and I won't go through that process because it's somewhat convoluted, but there's tutorials online that showcase it.
I need that.
Well, I'll make sure that there's a link that goes in the show notes for exactly where I figured out how to do this. But now here where it says Adobe, or where it says Profile, normally when you click on this, you get all the stuff from the camera manufacturer, like Faithful and Neutral and Vivid and what have you. But in here, and I've just reformatted my computer, so it's not going to show up. But in here, at the very bottom, and here I am not being prepared for this, it would have, camera infrared. And I can create one that says specifically infrared that sways the white balance even farther. But let's say we don't have that option. The easiest way that people have been doing this in a very long time or for a very long time rather, is called channel swapping. And so if I take this image and I bring it into Photoshop, Lightroom doesn't have the ability to swap color channels around, at least not yet. I hope that's something that gets introduced in the future. But Photoshop more than certainly does. And so if I open this up in Photoshop, we'll take a quick glance at how this process works and how we can take the image and get something useful out of it. Everybody following along so far?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes,
All
except
right.
I do have a question before you go to Photoshop.
Yes, Jen.
What if you went to the camera calibration panel as you have and you started to move those sliders? Would that have an effect? Could we just see what happens?
Yeah, well, let's do that. Let me just bring up my screen.
And the reason
share again.
I ask isn't because I'm trying to take you off course, but I'm
No.
what can be done inside of Lightroom if you don't have that extra software, or perhaps you don't have Photoshop.
So let's take the blue primary and sway that around, and I can get some interesting things happening there. And so the blue primary, if I bring that all the way up to 100, I get something that's looking a little bit better. The green primary, well, it's I'm not really. Well, kinda. Okay. Well, I'm getting somewhere at least. But so this is one way to adjust based on these primaries exactly how things are going to end up looking, and so a custom profile might create something that looks similar to this.
Okay.
But it's always going to be hit or miss, and every camera is going to produce slightly different results. So actually, let's take this one, Jan, and let's try and work with this and see what kind of colors we will be able to get and eke out of Photoshop. So let me just change my screen share here from Lightroom and jump ourselves over into the Photoshop universe. I've got a really big screen, so I'm just going to rescale things down so that we can see the various settings and things that I might be adjusting. Pardon the technical break here.
it's really important. I think that's wonderful.
Yes.
Yeah. Technical break is helpful. Now
Yeah,
obviously,
but for some reason it's not showing my my screen share window anymore. Well, this is quite odd.
Yeah, we just see your face now. We don't.
No, but when I click on screen share, it's not giving me an option to choose different. Oh, there it popped under behind. That's my fault.
It does that.
It
I was
does
just going to ask you while you load that up. You mentioned that you're using a modified camera. And I don't expect you to go into all the science about it, but perhaps you could just mention a bit about it and perhaps maybe a link where you could learn more about it.
Sure, and I want to show some examples that you can get with an unmodified camera as well at the end of this process. So because a camera is normally sensitive to infrared light and ultraviolet light as well, and there's a filter in front of the sensor called a low-pass filter. And there's a number of different things that happen within that array of filters, and one of them is to block infrared and ultraviolet. Because we can't see those spectrums, and the camera normally captures them, photos start to look really wonky. So the camera by default blocks them. It blocks it about 98% effectively. And that extra 2% is why you can do it with an unmodified camera, but we'll get to that in a bit. There are companies out there that you can send your camera to that will modify the low-pass filter. They'll actually remove it and replace it with a new one. And so I used a company called LifePixel, and the filter that I have chosen blocks all visible and ultraviolet and only lets through infrared light. So if I were to look through the viewfinder, it looks normal because the viewfinder is not affected, but all the light that's hitting the sensor will only appear in infrared. So it's very useful to do this with a camera that has live view functionality, and most of them do now, so that you can see on live view what the infrared world looks like. And so it costs usually around $350 to $450 to get a camera modified for this. It's not that cheap, but it's cheaper than a lens, and it brings an entirely new world of photography, more than a new lens would. So
yeah.
So let's go ahead and bring up Photoshop here. And in Photoshop, I've got this image. And, well, there's some things that I could do with this. I mean, if I try to do even just an auto tone, let's see what happens. It kind of brings things into light pretty well, but I'm going to save that step for later. What I'm going to start with is swapping the red and the blue color channels around. So in the Layers panel, and I've made an action for this, but I'll show you the long way to do it. If I click on the Channels panel, you'll see that in Photoshop, I can access the red, the green, and the blue color channels all separately. And what I need to end up doing is taking the red and replacing it with blue. So this gets a little bit confusing at first, but it'll make sense in the end. You have to take the red channel and duplicate it. So if you right-click on the channel and you've got the little context window that pops up, and you just click Duplicate Channel and just click OK. So now I have a copy of red. It's going to be helpful in a second, because the first step is I'm going to take blue and I'm going to select everything in the blue channel and I'm going to copy it, so Control C, and I'm going to go to the red channel and I'm going to paste it, so Control V. And so now if you looked at the image, it's green. That's kind of partway there. But now I need to copy red over top of blue, but wait a minute, I just got rid of red because I copied blue on top of it, which is why I needed to make a copy of red so that I still have red to copy it and paste it back over blue. And now if I look at the composite image, I'm getting there. Things are cyan, and I can fix that. That's easier to fix. And if I use my my auto tone tool, you'll see that things right away get pretty close. We're getting there. And then at that point, I'll probably just play around with some adjustment layers. Like I'll grab the hue and saturation adjustment layer, and I will choose the cyans, and I will change the hue of cyan towards something a little bit nicer. And so then I've got the cyan switching over to blue. And I might also choose the magentas, because I've got a bit of magenta tones in the shadows here, and I might just take the magentas and desaturate them. And so that is, in a nutshell, the finished image. I mean, I play around with brightness and other adjustments here and there, but most of the rest of it is all done in Lightroom. I just save it and I bring it back into the Lightroom workflow and just touch up an image as you would any other image. So that's how you do a false color infrared image.
Wow, that was.
Now, what if you wanted green on the bottom, for example? Could you do another hue saturation layer and use change the greens rather than the cyans?
Yeah, well, I mean, there was nothing green per se in here, but you mean like when I had only changed and copied one layer over?
No, what I was saying is, see where you're standing in the photo?
Yep.
It's currently on my screen, at least, it looks blue right now.
Yep.
What if you wanted it to look greenish or yellowish? Could you add another hue saturation adjustment layer and mask away the rest of the photo? And
Absolutely, you could. I'm standing like where it's bluish. That's actually pavement, so it would be kind of odd to have green pavement.
Oh, I thought it was grass. Sorry.
No, well, in infrared, the grass is what's glowing white.
Yeah.
Because infrared light behaves a lot differently than regular light does. Foliage, anything that produces photosynthesis, will reflect a lot of infrared light, and because of that, it glows. And it's not just green grass and leaves; it's dark purple leaves because they reflect the exact same amount of infrared light. So dark purple leaves will glow bright white. I think I discovered that when I was on the photo walk with you, Ron. You might have even asked me that question, and we scratched our heads and figured it out.
Yeah, we're going over a couple of things. I know that we are following people with backpacks, and you took some pictures, and some of the black backpacks were light in infrared, and some of the black backpacks were actually black.
Well, most of them were white, and if I bring it back to Lightroom here, and we take a look at this is an unedited infrared photograph, and if we see here we have Mr. Chris Bagley in the foreground. Hey Chris, how you doing? I don't know what people were looking at here. I think I looked over the edge and there was nothing there, but one person looks and everybody else has to. And so if you see, Chris, I don't know if you can chime in, but if you were to tell me what color your camera bag was, I'm pretty sure you will say black. And to further that, we have a picture of a fairly interesting gentleman here. And this guy here, who you might know, what color was your hat here, Ron?
Good question. What color was my hat that day? I think it was dark blue.
The answer is not bright white.
No, I'm pretty sure it was dark blue.
Yes. Now your sweater is black, and that's an interesting thing as well, where some camera bags are not.
You're actually showing the same sweater. I'm wearing the same sweater, and the collar is black, and the sweater is gray, and there the collar is white. So that's really interesting.
And so fabrics are often dyed to be black in infrared, black in the visual spectrum, but reflect a lot of infrared light so that they don't absorb as much heat. And so that's why camera bags will reflect white in infrared, and that's why your hat is also reflecting white, so that it doesn't absorb as much heat as it would otherwise. So it's kind of an interesting thing where I see these little bits and pieces, and I realize that the world is a little bit more complex when you dig into just about anything, including the types of dyes people use in clothing. Another thing that's interesting about infrared is people look rather ghostly and creepy in infrared. So we won't spend too much time looking at your vampire smile there, because your eyes get very dark, your skin gets very pale, and all blemishes get removed in infrared photography.
It
and
looks
it's kind
like my face in the video right now.
So yeah, there's some interesting things to consider when you're photographing in infrared. It is a different spectrum of light. It bounces off of things differently. Water, like you see in the background, is much, much darker, and the sky is usually darker as well, and it creates very surreal-looking environments. If we take a look at this image, this is a tree, and let me just zoom out so you can actually tell that it's a tree. And I thought it was an interesting tree, but in the visible light, it's not really anything special. It's just a tree in a field. But if I take this exact same image in infrared, you'll see an entirely different world come out of this particular photograph. And I think that this is kind of the magic of infrared, that it becomes like a winter scene in the middle of summer. And the foliage will all glow white, and the sky becomes quite dark. And so it almost looks like Super Mario Brothers World 7, with the dark sky and the white trees and all that kind of stuff. But it's a beautiful thing to explore, and it's fun to just walk around and look at the back of the camera in infrared because you don't know what it's going to look like. It's very hard to imagine it, at least without having experienced it before.
Yeah. Now I know in the past there was a lot of people that shot infrared film and came up with some pretty interesting stuff, but without having back when you had film, obviously you didn't have a digital back and you couldn't look at the results, so it took a long time to learn what was a good thing to shoot and what wasn't. And one of the things I seem to remember is that different times of day produce better results.
Well, you want to have bright sunlight, and ideally, high noon will give you great infrared work because you have the most bright sunlight at that point. So it's also great for photographers because if you're thinking, all right, well, this is the worst time to take pictures, just take out your infrared camera. It's the best time. You never have to stop.
I'm thinking that that's a great camera to take hiking.
It is because when you're dealing with natural environments, you see a lot of really fun stuff. Here's another example of what I call one of my favorite infrared shots, but I don't know if it's all that great. I like it. It's of an apple tree, and if you look closely, this is a lawnmower bicycle.
I am seeing that.
And so I thought that was quite a bizarre thing. I dragged it and put it under the tree as a prop. So this scene would have been interesting in visible light, but it takes on a totally new character in infrared. And to further your point too, Ron, about the film era, when you're doing it in film, you only really had the option to play around with black and white. Digital infrared still looks really good in black and white, and you can get all sorts of great details and sharpness and crispness. You don't sacrifice anything like that in infrared. But something that you do have to remember, and I don't think we've mentioned this yet, is your camera will focus to a different point in infrared. If you use autofocus without live view, and your autofocus sensor and your viewfinder says that it's in focus, and you take the picture, it will not be in focus.
Yeah.
So that's why live view is also important, because you can focus based on what's hitting the sensor, and manually focus. All these shots are manually focused as well.
Yes, I remember those days too, and if I recall, we had a red filter that we would put on the camera, and then not only could you not see what it was going to look like after you took the shot, but you also couldn't judge the exposure the same way, correct?
That's right. Any exposure meter is also calibrated for visible light, and so it's not going to accurately figure out how the infrared exposure is going to be. So again, for those shooting in infrared film, I salute you, because it was so hard. The digital era, it's as easy as just modifying a camera and going out and using live view and having fun. And there's lots of fun to be had, that's for sure. But there's some other interesting things that you don't normally consider. Like if you take a look at this image here, this is the spirit catcher here in Barrie with a really wide-angle lens, a fisheye lens. Yeah. And I was just experimenting for a class. This is visible light, and I've got the sun in the frame. And you can see that I have a few small little lens flares coming in all throughout the scene. I guess I had a bit of dust on the lens at the time. But if I photograph that same image in infrared, this is what I get.
Wow.
And so it got me to understand a little bit more about how cameras work too. And this is a funny wraparound to snowflakes, because the beautiful colors that I see in the center of snowflakes, they're caused, those rainbows, by thin film interference. That same optical principle is what lens coatings that limit flare and ghosting and that kind of stuff, that's what they're designed around. They use the same principles of optical interference to give you better images by canceling out certain wavelengths and clearing things up. But they're specifically designed around certain wavelengths. And so if they're designed around the wavelengths of the visible spectrum, then that means that they're probably not tailored to the infrared spectrum. And those coatings it's as if you're shooting with a lens with no coatings on it when you're shooting in infrared. And so that's why this lens suffers from huge amounts of flare when I've got the sun in the frame in infrared, but very minimal results in the visible spectrum. So it's kind of a fun thing. Again, I'm a photographer that loves to learn and geek out. And so when I get this stuff, I dig into all the fun details and figure out what's what.
Yeah, and we sure appreciate it, because then there's people like me that just love to go out and shoot and don't think too deep. And I could just get you to come on the show and tell me all about it.
Yeah, well, there you go. There you go.
So, Don, are you going to do a book on infrared photography? That would be fascinating.
I might, but I need to build up a bigger body of work. At this point, I do have some interesting results, but some of it's, beautiful stuff too. But I don't have nearly the volume that I have in snowflakes. So maybe at some point. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff to discuss, and I can have a science approach to it as well, just as I did with the snowflake book.
Yeah, I think that could be really quite successful. I know it's something I would definitely be interested in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's we're hitting that magic hour. It's 10 o'clock now.
Well, I just want to get in one quick thing before you wind off, Ron. I just wanted to show a few quick images. This one here is done without a modified camera, but with an infrared filter in front of the lens. And that requires very long exposures. This one here is about 4 minutes long for the amount of light to come through, and fairly high ISOs. But it can be done with just a filter in front of the camera. It's much trickier to do, but if you don't feel like biting the bullet and converting a camera to that process, then you can do this without creating a dedicated IR camera. And here's one more example. This is a 16-minute long exposure in bright sunlight in the middle of the day. So fun can be had either way.
Wow, that is fascinating. And that filter, it's an infrared filter. Is it like that you would go to Henry's or order or?
Yep. Yeah. So it would just screw in the front of your lens, and keep in mind that as soon as it's on, you can't see. You can't look through your viewfinder and see anything. If your camera goes up to extremely high ISOs, your live view might show you faint outlines of things that help you focus. And if not, then you have to kind of focus beforehand, put the filter on, take a picture, adjust your focus, take another one until you get the focus where it should be. It's a bit of a process, but slowing down in photography usually results in better compositions anyhow, so it doesn't hurt too much. The filters are not cheap. They're one of the more expensive filters because they're not that common. I had one for 77mm filter thread on some of my cameras, and I think that cost me somewhere between $200 and $300. So it's not cheap, and in fact it's encroaching on the cost of a modified camera. But the small ones cost between $50 and $60, so that might be worth experimenting with if you'd like.
Yeah.
Don, have you thought about teaching a workshop where people could come from all over to shoot with you and learn these techniques?
I've thought about it, but I only have one infrared camera right now, and no camera manufacturer makes one right out of the box. Sigma actually has their SD1 camera, which has a removable low-pass filter, and so that might work. I should talk to Sigma about something like that. But I would be totally game for that. I just need the equipment in order to make it happen.
Would it be possible to have a part of a workshop where people are bringing their cameras and you're helping them modify them?
I can't do the modifications myself. You need to have like a clean room set up, and you have to really know what you're doing in order to do this. You've got to have special tools, and I'm sure the first time anybody does this will probably break a camera. So I'd need broken cameras already to practice on, and that would be a very lengthy ordeal to make it happen. I'm not against it, but I just don't have the time right now. Maybe at some point in the future I'll add that to my my repertoire of skills, but getting it done by the professionals is generally the best idea, and LifePixel did a good job. So.
Great. Well, I'm just trying to think of other ways that you can get all of this wonderful and unique information out there, because I've watched a lot of shows and read a lot of books, and I really haven't heard a lot of this ever. So you're so unique and fascinating. Thank you.
And I discovered a lot of it on my own, and you're welcome. I'm happy to share this. It's a lot of fun to explore the world through a different perspective and then share that world. I mean, that's what I love about photography. That's what keeps me going.
Well, after the show, I want to talk with you, so don't jump off right away.
All right.
We're going to pick your brains after we log off, so we get the best of you.
Yeah.
Hey, I just want to thank you, Dawn, for being available tonight and being available before we log off for Christmas break. This will be our last show before we take a break for Christmas, and so our next show won't be till 2014.
Wow.
So that's awesome. Dawn, we have to get shooting again real soon. I'm trying to plan some winter stuff, so I'll talk to you about that after we log off.
And I want to say a quick thank you to Dave Bell, who just bought a copy of my book not too long ago while we were on the air.
That's right. I think you sold too well you were on the air.
Well, my wallet's out in the other room, so I need to wait.
Yeah, good excuse.
I think one of the things I really want to do is be able to let people see what kind of value there was. I mean, the book is fascinating because it's not just a picture book. The Crystals book, the Sky Crystals book, is a book full of fantastic information for photographers and for non-photographers, and it's something that'll be a conversation piece for decades, I'm sure. It'll never go up on a shelf. It'll always be out.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Hold
Dawn.
it up again so we can see it.
All right. So the book is called Sky Crystals, and you can get it at skycrystals.ca. And if you're local to me and I can ship it out tomorrow, I could probably get it to you in time for Christmas. So
yeah.
there you are.
And so Dawn is in Barrie, Ontario, Canada.
That's right.
Yeah. And so I'd like to thank our regular panelists. Dave, thank you for being so awesome, and Erika, love to have you on the show. And Jan, it was kind of different having me in the front seat, and you're kind of asking all those great questions. So
yeah, I'm digging this. This is really fun. You get to do more shows, Ron.
Okay. Yeah. We have lots of guests lined up for the new year. I'm not going to name them all off, but you know, I'm just really excited for what the new year's bringing and the guests that we're having coming on. So we're going to see you in 2014. So thanks for tuning in.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.